Banks must be trusted to hold our money and transfer it electronically, but they lend it out in waves of credit bubbles with barely a fraction in reserve. We have to trust them with our privacy, trust them not to let identity thieves drain our accounts. Satoshi Nakamoto. Welcome to another episode of What is Your Bitcoin Story podcast with your host Gigi, and today we're joined by Seb Bunney, whose path to Bitcoin is anything but ordinary. Seb's journey started not in the world of finance, but traversing the rugged terrain of Canadian backcountry as a mountain bike guide and coach. Despite the thrill of adventure, a yearn for deeper understanding beaconed. This led Seb to delve into the intricacies of real estate, financial markets, and very foundation of our economic system during his free time. The arrival of the pandemic presented an opportunity, and Seb strategically pivoted into the financial space. His unique background equipped him with a fresh perspective, and his passion for education soon found a new outlet in the digital realm. Today, Seb's teaching focuses on complexities of the macroeconomic landscape, particularly the intricacies of our monetary system. His dedication to financial literacy extends beyond the classroom. Seb co-founded the educational platform Looking Glass and has authored books like B for Bitcoin and his latest book, The Hidden Cost of Money, solidifying his commitment to knowledge sharing and empowering others on their financial journeys. So buckle up as we delve into Seb Bunney's unique Bitcoin story and explore his diverse experiences have shaped his perspective on the future of finance. Seb, welcome to the show.
Gigi, honestly, it's such a pleasure, and I truly appreciate you having me on. I absolutely love speaking to like-minded individuals, and when it comes to Bitcoin, I feel like people have gone down so many different rabbit holes in their life, and they like questioning the world around them. So that's always fun conversations.
I'm glad that you're just as excited as I am. So I guess we'll jump right into the rabbit hole. So Seb, let's take it back to the big question: where did your Bitcoin journey begin?
So this is such a tough question because I was on a podcast with Daniel Prince. This was a little while back, probably 2 years ago. And we were discussing this idea, like, what was your orange pill journey? And the reality is that much of the foundational bricks that were laid for me to be able to understand Bitcoin started before Bitcoin was even a thing. And so when I look back to my childhood, I think many of the bricks were laid then. And it's only in hindsight, looking back to my childhood, that I recognize this. And so I would say there's kind of three main areas or three main incidents that happened throughout my childhood, which really started to shape how I look at the world. And the first one was my parents separated when I was really young. When I was really young, my parents separated, and my mum had to support my two brothers and I, putting a roof over her head, food on the table. So when I look back at this in hindsight, you start to realize, wow, our monetary environment plays a huge role in our parents' ability to show up and support our needs. And this made me recognize that when we have a broken monetary environment and our parents have to work more to be able to put food on the table, well, it means that they're spending less time with their kids, us, and they may not be able to meet their emotional needs to the same extent. And so this is kind of this first big realization as an adult, looking back at childhood, how money really does shape who we are and whether or not our emotional needs can be met to the extent that our parents might want to be able to meet our emotional needs. So that was the first one. The second one was when I was about 9 years old. I'd saved up for this scooter. I wanted this scooter that was in the toy store so badly. I saved up for like 3 or 4 months for this scooter. I had freaking put blood, sweat, and tears. I had a paper round. We went in to go buy the scooter with my dad and my two brothers. And when we went in to go buy it, he felt bad that I was getting a scooter and my two brothers weren't. And so he bought them a scooter and I had to pay for mine. And I was devastated. I was just like, oh my God, I just freaking worked so hard for the scooter. And just to have it basically taken out from under me, and those guys were able to just get a scooter for no real effort. And this whole proof of work concept, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. The world feels unfair. But what's interesting is when I look back at this situation, in economics, there's something called the Cantillon effect, which is those closest to the monetary spigot or those closest to the money printer benefit disproportionately. And when I look at my brothers and their trajectory throughout their life, they're much more interventionistic, much more socialist leaning, much more left leaning, which is interesting because they were closer to the monetary spigot, which is my parents. They benefited disproportionately. Whereas I lean a lot more libertarian. I lean a lot more minimize intervention. because I think ultimately we need this proof of work. We grow from the environment around us. And the more you intervene, the more you create a lot of these byproducts. And then finally, I would say my first like true love in life was mountain biking. From a young age, I was just, as you mentioned in the start, in the intro, I was obsessed with mountain biking. I loved it. I just wanted to pursue mountain biking as a career. I wanted to do everything I could. And so I used to watch all of the movies, the mountain bike movies. I used to see my idols on the big screen. And when I moved to Canada to start pursuing mountain bike coaching and teaching, all of a sudden I'm working alongside my idols, these people that they're on the big screen, they're world renowned, and many of them are struggling financially. They're renting a place most of them can't buy. Most of them are up to their neck in credit card debt, and they don't really know where they're getting food. They're minimal sponsorships, you name it. And it made me realize that, okay, if I want to be able to pursue a career of mountain biking, I have to have passive income. I can't just be a mountain biker. And so again, all of these three events, my mum separating from my dad and having to support three kids, my dad and the whole scooter event, and this mountain bike realization that, hey, I can't support myself given this current environment, really made me recognize how much money plays a role and how we show up in the world. It shapes who we are and our capacity to pursue the things that we want to be able to pursue. And so from this, I had to go down some form of route to generate passive income. So I started investing in real estate. I started investing in the financial markets. And I was looking at the financial markets and real estate, believing we were in a free market. And so to give you an example, I owned a couple small little pieces of real estate. I had a little apartment, and coming into the pandemic in December of 2019, before the pandemic, I was like, the world feels unstable. It feels like we're about to go into a major collapse. It doesn't feel like the financial markets and real estate are really just going to continue on this upward trajectory. So I ended up selling my place, my little apartment. And when the pandemic hit, I was like, my God, I just timed the market. I just sold my property at the top. This is freaking amazing. But then all of a sudden, big short. Yeah. And then we just saw the intervention, the central banks step in, cut interest rates, inject capital into the economy, stimulate the economy through stimulus checks, you name it. And house prices skyrocketed. And so it slammed me. And this was obviously later on in my realizations, but it's just kind of to give an example. Yeah. It's these type of situations that made me realize wholeheartedly that we're not in a free market. We have a very centralized, controlled, interventionistic market, and it makes it very hard for individuals to get ahead when we're looking at the world through this free market lens. And so that ultimately, when you go down that route, you start to question, okay, why is this happening? And it kind of leads you to the money. It leads you to the money because you realize those, the central bankers, the people in charge of our monetary supply, interest rates, they ultimately govern our economic trajectory. But not only our economic trajectory, how we show up as individuals, whether our parents can meet our needs, whether or not we're incentivized to consume or whether we're incentivized to save, you name it. So I would say money really is, I would say, the foundational pillar of our society, but it's taken me my whole life to really realize this and just to recognize just how powerful money really is.
It's incredible, like how it's, as you said, like the journey didn't start like 2 years ago. It started like when you were a little child, and then slowly it's like a puzzle with different pieces coming together, painting this picture, and then suddenly you see the picture and you're like, wow, like the world really isn't like as I thought and most people think. And it's actually lucky that you come to that realization pretty young, because as I can see, Seb, you're still a very young man. Most people go through their life like trying to figure out what's wrong, like how does this world operate, and not even coming to the answer. So it must be fulfilling, right? That like everything kind of made sense, so to say, in the end.
It's interesting you say that, because when I went through traditional academia, I never really felt as if I fit in. I really struggled in traditional academia. I felt as if I wasn't very good at absorbing information. I didn't really have the desire and the interest in the subjects that were being taught in school. And so that's when I really say earlier, mountain biking was my first true love. It was this first thing that really just caught and grabbed my attention for years and years and years. And I just invested so much time and energy into it. And when I left school, I dropped out when I was about 14 years old. It just really was not motivating me. And when I moved over to Canada and I started teaching mountain biking and recognized, hey, I need these passive income streams, I started to read books on real estate. I started to read books on finance, macroeconomics. And suddenly I realized, hey, it wasn't that I was maybe thick or that I couldn't learn, and it was that school just didn't serve me. And actually,
Yeah.
what I was really passionate about was mountain biking in terms, I loved educating, I loved teaching, supporting people in their educational journey, whatever that journey might be. But I also really liked learning, but I just had to find my way to learn. And so what's been really fascinating since, I would say, my late teens is honing in on how I learn as an individual. And that has just blown me, it's completely blown my mind as to just how interconnected things are. And it goes back to kind of this point about money. What has really kind of been a profound realization over the last kind of 5 years, 6 years, has just been to what extent money really does weave its influence into society. And it's interesting because I feel like my journey has really led up until this moment, because so I've always been interested in education. So I love teaching and distilling down complex subjects into the simplest form. But I've also been really interested in psychology and childhood trauma, because I grew up in maybe, I'd say, an average family separated, but I'm always curious about how our childhood shapes how we grow up. And then I've also been really interested in investing and money and finance. And then I've also been really interested in psychology and that how do humans interact with one another. And what's interesting is all of these points have led to deepening my understanding about how money weaves its influence into our society. Because I think when we think about money, we very much often think about, well, money's just a medium of exchange. What we don't often think about is how much money actually really does shape our behavior, and it shapes how we show up, because we really are a product of our environment.
And
so
influences our decisions and
100%,
actions.
100%. And when we think about, say, Bitcoin is often talked about something called like time preference. And for those that aren't familiar with that term, we either sometimes, what I should say, not we either, it's a spectrum. And on one end of the spectrum, you've got a low time preference. That's where people are thinking long term. They're thinking about security. They're thinking about the future, prosperity. And then there's a short time preference, which is people are being impulsive. They're trying to meet their immediate needs, and they're not really thinking about the future. Now, the problem with our current monetary system is that when money is worth less over time, that means its purchasing power is greatest in the present moment. What does that do? Well, it incentivizes us to spend in the moment, to be impulsive, to think about the now. And so all of a sudden, our money is shifting how society thinks. It's shifting our thinking towards short-term impulsive desires as opposed to long-term stability and security, which I think is fascinating. And then the next one is like meaninglessness. I think the challenge with today's society is that when our money is worth less over time, all of a sudden, it means asset prices are rising, cost of living is rising. It's very hard for individuals to plan. If individuals can't plan, then meaninglessness can quickly set in. And so you see this in society today, where millennials, there's a lot of nihilism. People just don't really know what to do because they don't know what the future holds. They don't know what a house is going to cost in a year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time. So it's very hard to plan. And then the final one that I'll quickly just mention is just like compassion and altruism. I think humans have an innate desire to give back and support, because when we give back and support, not only does it make us feel good, but if we're supporting the community, oftentimes it's reciprocal. We benefit from that. And so we have this innate desire to give back and support. But in psychology, there's something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and people have probably heard of this. And it's got your base needs at the bottom. So you need security in terms of like food and shelter. And then only once we've met our base needs can we think about relationships, compassion and altruism, giving back to society, or like self-actualization and spiritual endeavors. Now, the challenge in society today is when money is worth less and less and less, and our cost of living is rising, we get stuck on this base level where we're just trying to put food on the table and a roof over our heads. And so ultimately, these kind of three different areas, and there's many more, but these three areas really show how when money breaks down, it changes how we show up. And I find that just so fascinating, tying in money into these various different areas. And that's what really is just like awakened this drive inside of me to help people along their educational journey with Bitcoin, because I truly believe Bitcoin can, again, help us not only in maybe increasing our purchasing power to make life a little easier, but it actually reframes how we view the world. It changes our behavior, which I think is just fascinating.
For sure, we go to depths in an episode that we recorded a few weeks ago with Ioanni Greenberg, where we talk about like how Bitcoin's this it's a financial psychedelic where kind of it rewires your brain and you never look at the world in the same eyes and views again. And I think definitely what Satoshi gave us was definitely needed, and the timing of it was like, talk about the perfect timing, like right on the brink of as the financial crisis was hitting, was ideal, because I want to bring this concept back, which you said, Seb, and I totally agree with you that the kind of money dictates the way our society is. And if we compare ourselves to other animals on this small planet we call Earth, the only real thing, there's many things, but the main thing that separates us from the animals is we have a monetary system, and we kind of view money as this religious thing, which I need to get a more of. And, it's all about, getting a bigger house, getting a bigger, car faster, everything in this whole, which you're talking about, short time preferences, consumerism trend, which is actually suffocating humanity and making it much more miserable than actually happier. Which, on the contrary, if we would have a long-term, time preference and what Bitcoin's trying to put forward, we would actually be taking care of ourselves and be thinking twice. Should I buy that latest iPhone? Should I, go on these excess, holidays, or just, maybe I'll go on one family holiday a year. So I think that is definitely needed. But in the current fiat legacy system, if you're saving instead of spending, well, you're essentially kind of, like that meme with the bicycle putting a stick in the wheel. You're essentially, you're fucking up the system, because the system needs you to spend so they can print more. But then that doesn't lead you to anything happy. And I totally agree with you, Seb, and not just millennials, but Gen Zs in general, which I believe Gen Zs they make up of the largest percentage of the human population at the moment is Gen Zs. And they kind of lived in this whole, what I call TikTok world, where it's all just swiping, like they're just bubbling around in bubbles, like not really thinking, like, forget tomorrow, like they're not thinking about anything. And it's scary, like that's future generations that are going to be essentially controlling the world one day. Not having a place to put down their feet and kind of plan for something and build on something. Society is on a very slippery slope.
No, and you make some really, really interesting points, which is the fact that I think that as money starts to break down, and we've discussed this idea that it starts to influence all of these areas of society. And I like to always bring it back to that social level, which is when money starts to break down, it starts impacting parents. Parents have to go and work more. And you can see this just in Canada alone. From 1970 to 2015, we have seen a doubling of dual earner households, both parents having to go out and work, and a halving of single earner households, as in a single parent supporting the whole family. And what's interesting is that means kids aren't having their emotional needs met to the same extent that they were historically. And it's really important for kids to obviously go and socialize and spend time with their peers. But what is more important is to have that grounding parental figure, because a parental figure has gone through life and already has a lot of experience. Parental figures, elders, you name it, pass down cultural knowledge. They pass down information about how to live off the land, how to distill down your morals, who you are and how you show up. And what's interesting is when we spend more time with our peers because our parents are busy having to go and work and put food on the table, we have a society that does not learn how to individuate, how to build out who they are and what it is that they value. Instead, when we spend a lot of time with our peers as a child, well, we want to conform, we want to look the same, we want to sound the same, we want to have the same mannerisms, because ultimately we just need to attach to survive. And so I think that it's really important. And or you could say it's what we're witnessing right now, is kids feel lost. We've got the highest rates of depression. We've got the highest rates of anxiety. We've got the highest rates of drug use, suicide, you name it, because kids just don't know who they are or how to show up in this world. And so you're starting to see how it really does start to shape the whole generation of people. And these TikTok users, I feel like so many kids these days, they struggle to critically think or form their own opinions, and they want to kind of sit with the crowd. And what that does is it opens up the world to controlling forces. And throughout history, whenever you have seen a breakdown of our monetary systems, you have seen things like Stalin, you have seen things like Hitler, you have seen things like Mao Zedong, where you get these controlling totalitarian authoritarian forces where people aren't really thinking for themselves. And so more than anything, I think what a sound monetary system, if we were to transition to something like Bitcoin, does is it gives people greater capacity to look inwards, given that they have more time, given that their purchasing power is going further. It gives them greater capacity to look inwards and ask themselves, who am I? Like, how do I want to show up? What is it that actually motivates me? And that gives parents greater capacity to meet their children's emotional needs. So ultimately, you end up with a society where people have individuated. People actually know who they are and how they want to show up. And that leads to, I believe, a lower probability of these controlling structures such as we have seen throughout history, that have led to very, very dark times. So I think this kind of stuff is so fascinating.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, also from like speaking from self experience, I'm a father of two, and I recently left Europe because I had to work essentially nearly three jobs. And there's nothing more I want to do than spend time with my little girls, and especially in these critical ages, up to 5 years old. My eldest one is 4, and the youngest one is 2. And time like flies so fast when you have children, and then when you kind of think how much you need to put in, how much you need to work to sustain the lives that you want to give them, and then you're kind of weighing out, should I be working more to give them better things, or should I work less to be more with them? And that essentially made us essentially leave Europe. Since April, we moved to my wife's Russian, and actually, in geopolitical terms, it's not maybe the some people would say the smartest move, but everybody has their own priorities. And since kind of moving to St. Petersburg, Russia, life has been so much easier because the standard of living is 3 times cheaper than in Europe. Things are 3 times better than in Europe because due to the sanctions that started a decade ago, they're a self-sustaining country. And luckily, I know the language as well, so I kind of fit right into the picture. And now actually I can spend a lot more time with my kids and do, focus on things, focus on this pod and a lot of other projects that I want to be focusing on. Instead of kind of living this, the American or European dream, like to make it out to the top, because you're never going to make it to the top. It's all this illusion where you're kind of like running a hamster on a wheel, trying to kind of get somewhere. But then in the end, you essentially wear yourself out and it's too late and you're a pensioner and you're kind of re-strategizing, why did I go down this path? So going back to your point of parenthood, I think that is super important. And the reason we have this whole crisis of depression and drug taking with younger generations is definitely that they're missing kind of the family bond and seeing the right example. And, being there for your children, I think, is the number one priority for parents. And on a Bitcoin standard and low time preference, that is essentially your get out of jail free card, right? If we put it that way, where you can really focus on the things that are important to you and really be the example to the future generations and be an inspiring individual instead of the dad that leaves early morning and comes late at night. So I can fully relate to what you said, Seb.
No, and it's fascinating because I think that our current monetary environment, unfortunately, has meant that everything is slowly becoming more and more financialized as our purchasing power declines. Yeah. And so families, people, individuals, we're constantly trying to just get what we can from society. It's a very extractive society. What can I extract in order to make my life just a little bit easier? And so we've seen the massive burgeoning financialized world where you've got mortgage brokers, you've got financial planners, you've got investment bankers, you've got you name it. And all of this is a result of people that are just simply trying to protect their purchasing power. And what is just so fascinating is that if we actually just moved back towards a monetary system that allowed us to simply save because our purchasing power increased over time, I think you would see the absolute decimation of the financial industry because you realize so much of it is fictional. It's just built up. It's not needed. It's completely unnecessary. And that, I think, is really, it's amazing because a lot of that energy that currently is going towards the financial system would then be redirected towards value creation. People would go back to the land. People would go back to trying to create value for society, which adds value to communities, which helps actually ease people's lives in general. Not only that, you would see more energy going back towards technological innovation, which then makes people's lives better. As opposed to at the moment, there's just immense amounts of energy being completely destroyed and decimated in the financial industry, all under the guise of just trying to create more financial value.
Pumping up them stonks, right? Which I find it fascinating how much, as you said, energy, time, blood, sweat, and tears go into the stock market, which talk about Ponzi's, like there's no bigger, well, actually the bigger Ponzi than the stock market is the Fed itself, but most people don't realize that. But it's just crazy, like so many resources allocated to nothing, and then people say, Bitcoin's a bubble and then Bitcoin doesn't have any value. to me, it's the other way around. Like, how can some Amazon stock or Tesla stock be worth hundreds of dollars where you have no say in it, you have no control for whatever, what we saw just yesterday, 24 hours ago, with Berkshire Hathaway stock just having a glitch and wiping out 99%, and everybody's like, oh, what's happening? And I love all the memes that coming out, this would never happen with Bitcoin, opt out, choose Bitcoin. And it's true, because you realize that everything is manipulated, and nothing is as it seems. So actually, kind of in this very deceptive world, that the only real thing, if we can call it real, is the sats itself that are getting mined on average every 10 minutes, and everybody can check it for themselves. There's no more trust or believing anyone. I hate it when people say, trust me, trust me. I usually tell people, when someone tells you trust me, or tells you, like, I'm telling you honestly, they're definitely not trustworthy or honest. Because if you're honest or trustworthy, you're not going to go out and say it, right? So as we do on a Bitcoin mindset, we like to verify things. And the only thing we can verify is the actual Bitcoin blockchain, which is the most beautiful thing that has probably been done in a long time, talking about innovation and technological innovation specifically. Because if we look for the last 30, 40, 50 years, I mean, humanity hasn't done much. Like, the automotive came out, computers came out, they just became much, much faster and much smaller and much cheaper, relatively cheaper. But apart from that, like, there was no big innovation that came through. Kind of everybody was just fixated on this money supply, and trading this to further prompt their own wallets, instead of giving back to society and helping people come to different realizations. And Bitcoin is just such a, like, even though Satoshi named it peer-to-peer cash, like, I feel like peer-to-peer cash is just like the tip of the iceberg. But then once you get through the peer-to-peer cash concept, it opens a whole new world to you, where you start, questioning, what do you eat? What is truly, everything you've been taught since you were a child in school. You come to a realization, like, maybe things weren't so true. And it's not that people were intentionally lying. It's that people that were teaching you were programmed to say the stuff that they should say, even though some of them didn't make sense of it. Like, I remember I studied in college in London. I studied business studies, which is kind of a general, millennial degree to have. I call a degree of nothing, really, because once you finish it, you're kind of like the same as without having a degree. Because who wants to employ a business manager with no experience? But that's a story for another time. But I remember in one of the early finance and economics classes, they asked, what's the number one priority for a business? And, it was one of the first lectures, and most people were shy. But I was sitting in the front row, I was all proud, sticking up my hand, and they go, yeah, Gigi, even though I wasn't Gigi back then. But for the sake of the example, he goes, yeah, Gigi, what's the number one priority of a business? And I go, to provide the best customer service to clients. And he said, no. He goes, that's not the right answer. And I was shocked. I was like, how is it? Like, what's the point of business if you're not there to provide, the best goods or services to your clients? And then, since nobody else answered, and everybody's kind of waiting for the answer was to make a profit. And I was like, uh-huh. I was like, well, if that's the number one priority of a business, it makes sense why this world is, sorry for my French, so fucked up. Because everybody's just looking how to make more money, instead of, providing value and looking after your partners, your clients, your coworkers. It's all about the money. And then I realized that, kind of everybody's chasing this money, but they don't, like, money at the end of the day is not going to make you happy. Like, what's going to make you happy is you fulfilling and spending every minute of your life doing something you love. And my dad and my whole ancestry, kind of, I come from call it entrepreneurial family, even though we used to be called tradesmen before this term became popular, always trading and buying and selling, exchanging. And I remember my father did many different roles, and he's done insane amount of businesses. And growing up, I was always asking my dad, and he was always my role model. I would ask him, like, Dad, what should I do in life? There's so many things I could do. And he said, you know what, son, like, do something that you love and you'll never work a day in your life. And it took me about solid 15, 17 years for that, like, to realize. Because being a small child, I was like, well, what do you mean? Like, if I'm doing something, how am I not, how am I not working every day of my life? Like, I'm still doing something. But then once I came to Bitcoin, and I was further down the line, I was like, wow, like I would happily dedicate the rest of my 50, 60 years that I have on this planet, working on this beautiful protocol and helping people come to this realization. And it doesn't feel like work. This Bitcoin podcast that I've been doing now for a year, like it feels like I started it yesterday. And even though it's 9:30 and usually my bedtime is in 20 minutes time, but to me it like feels like it's the morning. Like I love this, and I truly see the meaning in, if you do what you love, you don't work a day in your life. And as you said, Seb, like in your case, mountain biking, like the love and passion you had since you were a small child, if there would be a way to monetize it, I'm sure you would be riding still your bikes today and not thinking about anything. But then in this fiat system, you realize, as you mentioned, we need this residual income. We need some way of money printing our own way to get to the end of the month and pay the bills and, get the gas and all of these things. But on a Bitcoin standard, I truly believe everybody, even from a young age, if you want to be a fireman, a dancer, a scientist, a poet, an astronaut, whatever it is, you will be able to do that, from early on in life. You won't have to go through this bullshit system of finish high school, go get a good university degree to get a good job, and you'll be set for life. That doesn't work. That model was here, it was gone, and now it's a new world. And it's, even though it's scary, I truly believe it's one of the best times in humanity because there's so much opportunity, but people just don't look at the bright side of life. They're focused on the dark things, and everything's terrible. There's wars going on, and I don't know what to do anymore with my life. But if you just slightly diverge your view and kind of look out and see the possibilities that could be done in these chaotic times, it is a truly magical time, I believe.
No, and I think it's so interesting that you brought up this kind of idea about kind of pursuing things you're interested in. And I remember when I was about probably 20 years old, I listened to a TED talk, and this lady was discussing this idea that historically, if we go back 200, 300 years, when it came to communities, there were specific roles that you needed in a community. You needed a doctor, you needed the blacksmith, you needed the farmer,
Yeah.
you needed the stables person, like you name it. And so someone would spend their whole life specializing in one skill because the society needed that skill, and you became the expert, and then you shared that skill with everyone else in society. And what is interesting is, as society's evolved and become a lot more complex, there's been a lot more opportunity for jobs. And so this lady in this TED talk was discussing this idea that many of us, we don't have this calling passion where I want to be a doctor, and my whole life I just want to dedicate to just being a doctor. And so we start down this path. Okay, well, maybe I'm going to be a mountain bike instructor, and then you do that for a few years, and you're just like, man, I really enjoy this, but maybe I want to do a little more. So then you start investing. Then you do this for a few years, and then you realize, I'm investing, but the monetary system seems broken. So maybe I want to educate about finance, and you go and start writing a book. And so she describes this idea of multi-potentialities. And they're people that ultimately they go down this path and they have a relatively deep understanding of many different areas rather than an incredibly deep understanding of one area, such as being a doctor. And society needs both of these people. They need specialists and they need multi-potentialites. And what ends up happening is innovation stems from people that pursue all of these various different interests because they're putting together these abstract ideas. I'm really interested in psychology and I'm really interested in Bitcoin. How does money impact our psychology? And so you start piecing together these random ideas from abstract, different, disparate ideas. Whereas specialists, they focus in on one thing and they become really, really good at that thing. And what you'll notice is entrepreneurs tend to be multi-potentialites. They come together with an idea and then they hire the specialists to come on board and then help push that idea. And so this, when I watched this TED talk years ago, and if you just type in the word multi-potentialite, it'll probably come up. But it blew my mind because I was like, I've always felt a little lost because I've done something for a handful of years and then I've moved on to the next thing. Done something for a handful of years and then moved on to the next thing. And each time I've been like, this is my calling, and then on to the next thing. And the reality is that I think that life is, the spice of life is trying out different things. That said, I think although I have many more things to try out, I think they're all going to resonate around Bitcoin because I think Bitcoin to me is where the future is heading. And if we can change the monetary system, we can fix so many of the issues that we face in society.
Yeah, I totally agree. And if you look at some of these like greatest people, I mean the Steve Jobs of the world, and Elon Musk primarily today, like these are people that I like to call dot connectors. They see a problem and they go, this thing can go with this thing. And then they get, as you said, the experts on board to like fine tune that idea. And I agree, we need a fair mix of both of these. Or I like to simplify jack of all trades, right? Like someone that's like constantly doing everything instead of one thing, and having that balance. And I think like there's a lot of similarities from your life story, Seb, that I can relate with myself as well, where I never really found myself in the right profession and the right thing in life. I've always, been switching here, there. And as you said, like every time you think like this is my calling, and then you realize after a time, you're like, no, I want to move on to the next thing. But I totally agree with Bitcoin, especially. To me, it's such a vital and arguably the most important thing that I could focus on, that could give back and make this world a better place than I entered it. That there's nothing more I want to focus my energy and time and actual work on. Today it's the podcast, but 5 years down the line, who knows where it could take me, my so to say Bitcoin and slash crypto, because I have a big differentiation. It took me some time between those two. Was in 2017 when I worked in the financial sector system, in the foreign exchange industry, which terrible place. But anyways, it was time and a place for everything. And as an analyst, everybody was wanting to trade Bitcoin and Ethereum and everything, but nobody really knew what it was. And even today, if you ask the average person what is Bitcoin, where's Ethereum or any of these shitcoins, nobody really knows. But it just goes up, where they go. It's very volatile. And I kind of went down this educational route where I launched back then. I was based in Cyprus. The first, it was called Bitcoin and Crypto Educational Consultancy, and I found the most kind of fulfilling thing. And even in my previous job as a financial analyst, the most fulfilling thing was when you, and similar to this, I'm sure you will relate, Seb, when you explain something to someone and it clicks and they're so thankful for it. That was the most rewarding thing. So educating as well, to me was something very close to heart, and I'm still looking somehow in the future to bring it back, because I think for us to really fix the money with Bitcoin, we really need to focus on educating people and sparking their own interest to go down their own journeys and launch their own businesses, whatever maybe businesses or products, while utilizing Bitcoin. And today, especially in third world countries where it's, most people are still unbanked, which is crazy in 2024 for the monetary system to be around for so many hundreds of years, yet 1/3 of the planet still doesn't have a bank account. It's kind of Bitcoin puts forward this whole new opportunity to people to start selling or giving their products in exchange for sats, may that be through Lightning or on-chain or any other future tech that's coming, the liquids and so forward. It's just fascinating, and I really want to help those people have the full potential and forget about this cabal system of how much do we take, and the answers, and kind of feels like a full-on dictatorship, where especially in Europe with all these like AML and anti-terrorist measures, which at the end of the day they're the biggest terrorists, and we need to prove, where do I get my money from, where am I going to spend it, how much am I expecting to get per year, like crazy questions, like down to putting your passport next to your face, fingerprint, like next thing they want to know like what underwear size you're wearing. Is just, it's insane. Like, how have these institutions, like, where did we go wrong where we said, okay, yeah, let's go forward with this? But I guess it's kind of this like, not problem solution, it's kind of these global elites, they make these world events, like we recent one had COVID, where everything just locked down, shut down, and everybody's like lost, what am I doing? And then they're like, oh, we're gonna do this measure and this measure, and we're like, yeah, like, let's go forward with it. But it feels like with every big event, starting essentially from 2001 with the actual terrorist event of Twin Towers going down, and I'm sure most people by now know that's an inside job. Like, you suddenly now through airports, you need to be stripping down to your underwear to do like crazy stuff, and yet terrorism still prevails today, because the terrorists are not the guys hiding in caves with AKs. They're actually sitting in White Houses and sitting in Parliament and dictating, being the right people, and the lords of society are the real terrorists, and we are the true victims of this pure brainwashing, which internet kind of started this Pandora's box, but now Bitcoin is just solidifying it, because now it's really a stage where they can't fight it anymore, and they're just, putting their last resources, printing so hard, influencing their media to suppress it and say how it's burning our oceans, and it's terrible, and people are psychopaths who save in Bitcoin, but that can only go on for so long until people slowly but surely wake up to the lies, and they realize that apart from Bitcoin, there's no way out of opting for the system. So yeah, it's once again, what a time to be alive. I can't say that enough.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? I think it's interesting because we were discussing this idea that many of us have so many of these interests, and the world is a hard place to live in right now. And if anyone's listening to this, they're probably already down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And I urge you guys, like, no matter who you are and whatever your background is, you speak to a unique cohort of individuals and you have a unique skill set. I feel so lucky that when I came into Bitcoin, I had this understanding of psychology. I had this man and by constructing background that I like to be able to educate and teach. And I also had a deep passion for kind of like trauma and how our childhood shapes who we are. And then I also was interested in investing. And on the face of it, you're just like, what are all of these things have in common? They look like they've got nothing in common. But when I started down this Bitcoin rabbit hole, I was like, man, how do I add value to the community? And suddenly I realized I was like, man, I have my own unique set of skills that maybe help people along in their journey. I speak to my own unique cohort of individuals. And so more than anything, if you're listening to this already, I urge you guys to just put yourself out there. You don't have to be Ray Dalio or Warren Buffett and deeply understand something to the nth degree to be able to start talking about it. Just share from your own experience. And that in itself will help you learn more and find out and collaborate with others as to what it is that the market wants, what it is that people are finding value in. And that's what I think is so cool about a free market, is that if you put out content and people don't resonate with it, cool. Well, maybe you go back and you think, okay, if people didn't resonate with it, why didn't they resonate with it? And then you put out another piece and they resonate with it. You're like, this piece people resonated with and this piece didn't. So you're developing your understanding about how to add value in society through collaborating with the free market. So I just think it's so cool. More than anything, what will allow us to move through this transition period where we've got a monetary system that doesn't serve us and elite people that unfortunately can take advantage of the system to their benefit and to our detriment, is that through education and more awakening, then naturally we're going to transition to the world that hopefully we can envision, that hopefully gives us more capacity to show up how we want.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess the same thing goes to you. I mean, Seb, you've gone through it. If someone would have told you, 4 or 5 years ago, Seb, you're going to be writing books like Before Bitcoin and the hidden cost of money, you'd be like, what? No way, or even younger, when you were riding your bike in the mountains, you would have never thought you would be an author, right? And look at it today. It's like, it just came out, sprung out of you naturally. And as you said, you don't have to be the Ray Dalio or the Stephen King of the world. You never know what's next down your pathway, but you need to be curious. You need to be picking, instead of just sitting on the couch and, switching the Netflix on, pick up a book or learn. There's tons of valuable, resources online for free. I think even like the Ivy League, like the Harvard courses, you can learn them now for free. Like most courses are free accessible, yet most people prefer to sit back and, watch streamed stuff, which is, I mean, I don't blame them because it's so easy. It's like, it's your own choice. It's like, oh, do we do a little Netflix binge or should I go study some? And it's like, no, but like I've had so many hours of work, but, be that little willpower push and instead of doing that evening Netflix and chill, learn something, because you never know what will be down the path. And now, circling back to my question, which I wanted to bring up, how did you come about, Seb, to writing your first book and now the hidden cost of money, which I'm seeing is doing very popular with how many weeks as bestseller in the finance sector, right, on Amazon?
Yeah, honestly, I've been completely humbled by the response. I put out this book, and given that I'm just like a mountain bike instructor who likes talking about macroeconomics, Bitcoin, and finance, I never expected it to hit #1 bestseller globally in the US, in Canada, in Australia, in the UK, in finance, macroeconomics, monetary policy. I was just completely in awe. And I think that going back to this idea, like I've had all of these interests throughout my life. One of those interests that helped me out immensely is I've always been passionate about learning. I've loved to be able to learn and hone in on how I learn best. And what's interesting is as I have read books throughout my kind of 20s, late teens into my 20s, I have taken a lot of notes on these books. And so I use a open source software called Obsidian, and I take notes on these books. And what that means is that when I went to go write the book, which I never ever expected to write a book, given that I dropped out of school when I was 14, I dropped out of English when I was 12 because I just despised it, and I had never really written anything in my life. But when I went to go start writing, I had a decade plus of all of this content that I consumed and this understanding about how I saw the world and how I thought the world worked. And that allowed me to help formulate my theories and my ideas around money and how money weaves its influence in society and my thoughts on Bitcoin. And so more than anything, what I think has helped me immensely is that when I learn, I take notes. Because what I came to understand through digging into psychology is our brain is phenomenal at creating ideas, connecting two random points and finding kind of a middle ground. But what our brain is not very good at is remembering specific points of information, so details. And so when we start taking notes on something, we effectively create a second brain. We create a scaffolding around our brain that stores all of this information that we've consumed, and it holds it there so that we can access it whenever we need to access it. And what that does is if we're able to offload all of the details, we can allow our mind to think about the connections. How do I connect this to this? Oh man, this is interesting. This is tied to this over here. And so for me, I've got this kind of note-taking app that there's a guy called Tiago Forte that calls it his second brain. And I very much see this as my second brain because I have probably about 500 books worth of information and notes distilled down. And the second point I'll make when it comes to note-taking is that it can be a very daunting process. When we start reading a book, okay, well, chapter 1 included XYZ. Chapter 2 included ABC. And that's a very dry way to think about note-taking. The reality is that if we want to note-take effectively, we take notes on things that inspire us and spark like engagement. And so I think about note-taking as kind of a multi-step process. First, when I'm reading a book, I take notes on the things that stood out to me. Once I've finished the book, I then go through those notes of the things that have stood out to me, and then I go and bold the ones that, wow, this was a really powerful point. Once I've bolded all the ones that were very powerful, I then have a read over the ones that were powerful, and then I expand on the ones that really grabbed my attention, that are actually maybe altered how I see the world in a certain way. I go and expand on that point with my own thoughts. And so by doing this, you ignore everything in the book that doesn't really add any value to your life, that didn't jump out at you, but it helps you to really distill down the key points of interest that help me really, or this book resonate to me. And ultimately, this has helped me immensely, immeasurably when it came to writing a book. I think at the back of The Hidden Cost of Money, I think there's something like 500 citations. There's about 20 pages just of citations. And that's not from when I started writing the book, I was like, oh, this is happening. I need to go find a citation. That's from 10 plus years of having all this information accumulated so that when I started writing, I'd be like, oh, in chapter 4, I'm talking about behavior. Well, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I remember in this book it talks about this, and so I can pull that citation. And so it's helped me immensely because I've got this massive database of information that I've already distilled down into my own words. And so if there's anything that I recommend, if there's one thing I recommend to individuals, it's find out how you learn and then take notes on that information, because we consume so much information daily and so much of it goes in one ear and out the other. And the second point that I'll quickly make is that many times if we try to read, and reading for me, I've always struggled with reading. I read very slow. I get distracted really easily. And so audio is so much more effective for me. Now, if you live in the city, this can be quite challenging. If you're listening to audiobooks walking around stimulating environments where there's cars, honking, lights, it's very hard for you to focus. But I feel so lucky that I have a little husky, I have a dog, and I go and walk for a couple hours every single day, and I listen to my books in the forest. And there's almost no one in the forest. And so there's a very low stimulation environment. My dog can go off and do her thing, and I'm able to really sit in with this book or whatever type of content that I'm consuming. And that has helped me, again, immeasurably, because it allows me to sit with that content and distill down the information. And so those kind of 2 points. 1, take notes. And 2, find out how you learn. And for me personally, that is through audiobooks. And so I spend a lot of time digging through audiobooks, finding new books to read, because I think that audio works phenomenally for me and trying to be in a non-stimulating environment.
Yeah, it's totally agree. I mean, so many people are demotivated by reading books because, as you said, they may be reading slow, or they can't focus on it. But there's so many other ways through, as you said, audiobooks, where instead of listening to some music on your commute to work, you could be listening to perhaps your next favorite book. And you never know what works for you, and so you should be testing things out. I can fully relate to the love of books. I actually love physically reading my books. I never liked ebooks because I like the physical thing of holding the book in my hands, and if there's a note, and I should be making more, so I learned something from this episode with the note taking, and filtering it through, not just putting a little note, but then writing it down, highlighting, going deeper into, and finding a true meaning of what stood out to me. I try and start every day with a 30 to 40 minute reading session, because if I start my day without reading, it's kind of just chaos. I'm jumping from here to there to there. But starting off with my morning, flat white and my book for half an hour, take the kids to nursery, and then I know I've got my gap of my own serenity and peace. No phone, everything is on silent, switched off. It just puts me in the right mindset, and to me, it became such a big thing. It's like some people like to meditate in the mornings, do a swim, do a jog, go to the gym. To me, like the reading aspect came super important, and I feel like the more I read, the more it calms me, and I don't know, like in this whole world of bombardment and information from the computer screen, from the phones, from the TVs, there's so much just like flashing, that like reading is so peaceful, and I couldn't recommend it to more people to start reading, may that be physically reading a book or ebook or audiobook. But truly, to all the listeners that are still uninspired, I guess you are reading the wrong books, because if you read a book on a topic that you're interested, my Lord, you're not going to put it down or put down those headphones, because you're just going to want to get more of it. So that being said, in school, I hated reading because I was forced to read stuff that I wasn't interested in. And same with most classes and activities that, I was, so to say, forced because I had to go through the academic curriculum. I really hated school. But then afterwards, when I go to university and the whole business studies cycle, I really like learning, because it was kind of learning for me to learn things of how I can operate my own future businesses. And that was, as in your case, Seb, kind of you come to your own realization and find your own system of how it works. So even though we're all essentially the same, we're all made out of, blood, flesh and water, but we all have our own ways of processing information, of fitting into society. But now with Bitcoin, it kind of brings us closer to collaborating and working together, instead of being this, this plus and minus, negative and positive magnets where we're rebounding, and instead of attaching together and helping build something. So yeah, I wanted to bring that around. But I guess then I want to also ask you, how did the educational platform that you co-founded, Looking Glass, how did that come around? How did that come about?
For sure. And going back before I answer that question, I just wanted to make one point about books, which I think is fascinating, is that when it comes to content consumption, the longer it takes someone to create a piece of content, it tends to be deeper in value, because there's a lot of thought that's gone into it. If someone has written a book, especially a big book, that can be a lifetime of information and knowledge condensed into a single kind of piece of content. Whereas when you look at a TikTok video, a short little meme, or some little thread on Twitter, the easier it is for someone to create something, the less value there is in that thing. And on top of that, the more noise there is often in that thing. And so what I'm really conscious of now as an adult, I've never actually owned a TV in my adult life. And as a kid, I did, but as an adult, I've never owned a TV, because the easier it is to access content, and the shorter that content is, usually we're just filling our brain with just information. And that information isn't necessarily adding value. Whereas I want to be able to fill my brain with quality information that hopefully has been distilled down. And a book is proof of work. Someone's had to put time and energy into that book. That's not to say that every book in the world offers value. There are immense amounts of books that don't offer value. And one thing that's taken me a long time to really kind of work through is there's this fear mindset that, oh man, this year I'm going to read 20 books. Next year I'm going to read 50 books. Next year I'm going to read 100 books. We shouldn't be reading books just for the sake of reading books. And I used to read books. The moment I started it, I'd be like, okay, I've got to finish it. And I would just like burn through this book, even though I just hated it. And so now, whenever I read, if I start reading a book and it doesn't interest me, I just drop it. I'm not going to waste my time on a book that doesn't interest me. And not only that,
No.
if I'm reading a book and actually I only need a specific piece of information from that book, I'll skip to the chapter that has that information. I don't always think about reading books linearly from chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sometimes I'll jump around. Some books you don't have to read linearly unless you're obviously a fiction reader and it makes sense to read it linearly unless you want the ending before you read the start. But ultimately, I think that when it comes to books, they're for me the densest form of information, given that you can get a lifetimes of learning in just in a single piece of content, which I think is profound. But answering your question about the platform, so Greg Foss, another prominent Bitcoiner in the space that's been a little quiet for a little while now, my business partner Daz, and a couple others. In 2021, we really recognized that there was not enough content out there that spoke to the layperson, that spoke to the working individual. And more than anything, we just wanted to support people in their educational journey. And we had a very similar goal in that, well, one, Greg had an immense amount of network of individuals and a large following. But Daz and myself, we're very passionate about writing for the layperson, removing the jargon. And so we started Looking Glass Education with the whole goal of distilling down content, making it accessible for the average working individual, and making it freely accessible. And so if you go to lookingglasseducation.com, we have our free foundations course that dives into a bit of macroeconomics, the evolution of money. How do we get here? How can we protect ourselves as individuals? And then in part 2 of that course, it dives into Bitcoin. Why Bitcoin, the technical functionality of Bitcoin, how the ledger works, blockchain, and it explains it for the layperson. And we feel that's so important. If we want to move society forward and support those on the bottom rung of society, well, we have to have content that's easily accessible. And then that's kind of grown from just an educational platform to we recognize, well, people also need help with custody. Self-custody is so incredibly intimidating. So we created Coddle, and we help people with self-custody, and we help people with collaborative custody in partnership with an Australian company called the Bitcoin Advisor. And so if anyone's interested in whether it's education or they're interested in kind of having kind of a handheld through a custody solution, feel free to just reach out at Looking Glass Education or Seb Bunney on Twitter, and I'm more than happy to help out in any way I can. But it's been such a cool journey to be able to just meet these inspiring people that have helped me along my own educational journey, to have the opportunity to come on podcasts with people such as yourself or Preston Pish and Robert Breedlove. It's just been, I feel truly, truly humbled. And so this community never ceases to amaze me.
Yeah, it feels like in the Bitcoin space, sometimes you need to pinch yourself and question, is this really real or is this all a dream? Because things just spontaneously arise, and it does feel like a timeless time. And that to me is the most special thing. Just the same as I'm sure you've experienced when you go to a Bitcoin only conference, it feels like time has paused. Like there's no time. Like you're on the same par with people, and you see the same things, the same values. And I'm actually talking about Bitcoin conferences. I'm off to BTC Prague next week, which is going to be a big thing, and I'm looking forward to reconnecting with a lot of Bitcoiners, meeting a lot of new Bitcoiners, and that to me is just like my own little vacation of Bitcoin heaven, where I just go and suck in all the information. Hopefully find some new collaborations with fellow peers and just enjoy life, because at the end of the day, life is super short, which I tell everybody, including my daughters. They're super young still, but I'm slowly programming them to cherish every moment, because just last night, my eldest was saying, "Oh, Dad, like I want to be grown," and I said, "No, you don't want to be grown. Like enjoy this time. Like this is the time where you have like no worries. You just like do what you want every day. Daddy and mommy takes care of everything. Don't be rushing to grow up, because you can never rewind the clock back." And that goes to not just kids, but all of us. Time flies so fast that we should be really spending time on things we love and trying to give back to society and our social circle, instead of trying to steal of each other, may that be time-wise, attention-wise, energy-wise, monetary-wise, because then in the end, we all lose out instead of being in a win-win situation, which I'm much more in favor of a win-win situation. So, yeah, I mean, anything else, Seb, that you want to leave our listeners with? I mean, you've already dropped a lot of wisdom on us, especially with how education plays a vital role and finding yourself and what really is your meaning, and what's fulfilling to you to pursue. But any other advice you want to leave to listeners, which I don't think we have many no coiners yet. I'm sure in the future when people will discover the podcast, they'll still be on the sidelines. But I always like to close off the episode with what is one or maybe two, up to you, piece of advice you want to leave to someone who's like interested to get started with Bitcoin, but they're still skeptical about it. What's some good advice for them?
You know what? Going back to that point, kind of when you're talking about your kid and telling him to kind of really enjoy the moment, I think one of the things that we can sometimes get stuck in the habit of doing as a Bitcoiner is this low time preference thinking, where we're thinking about the future, is phenomenal. It allows us to build prosperity, but it can also mean that sometimes we're not present. And I have a little sticky note right next to my bed that says, I need to stop the I'll be happy when Bitcoin reaches this price, when I can buy a house, when I can do this. And the reality is, whenever we say I'll be happy when, we're not present. We're not allowing us to actually embrace the moment for what it is. And so I think that life is about finding that balance. I think you don't want to be purely impulsive to the point where, okay, you know what, I'm just going to sell all my Bitcoin, sell everything. I'm just going to go take a cruise and live lavishly right now. But at the same time, we don't want to constantly push off our present moment and enjoyment in the present solely into the future, because there is no certainty. We don't know what the future holds. And of course, I've never been more certain about something in my life. I can't guarantee that Bitcoin is going to succeed. And so because of that, we've still got to be present in the moment, still focus on those little dinner parties, still focus on doing the things that motivate you and being passionate about the things that create that like inspiration and that fire inside of you. And so I think that finding that balance in life is so important. And again, for Bitcoin is entering the space, I would probably just say so many times we have this aversion to Bitcoin. We have heard so much misinformation around Bitcoin. We've seen so much FUD in the news. Bitcoin is volatile. Bitcoin is boiling the oceans. Bitcoin is this. Bitcoin is that. And being able to come in and just try to look at this thing objectively and look at it through your lens of what also interests you. Because Bitcoin really is for everyone. It doesn't actually matter if you're left-leaning politically or right-leaning, you're interested in mountain biking, you're interested in economics, you're interested in relationships. Bitcoin really does tie to every aspect of life, and it's just about finding how Bitcoin motivates and inspires you. And going back to that point that I made earlier, if you're already in Bitcoin, I urge you guys just to put yourself out there and start sharing your thoughts. Because by sharing your thoughts, you'll speak to a unique cohort of individuals that will help grow the Bitcoin ecosystem. Because Bitcoin is not a centralized entity. It doesn't have a marketing department. We as individuals, Gigi, yourself, and all of these other incredible influential individuals, we are the marketing department that helps Bitcoin grow.
And Gary Gensler and
Gary
the
Gensler,
whole
100%.
No, you couldn't have said it better. Seb, it's been a true pleasure and honor having you on. You'll be surprised. I've listened to most of the podcasts, from What Bitcoin Did to the Robert Breedlove and even the Daniel Prince one, which was some time ago. It's been a true honor having you on, and it's amazing to see the journey that people around the world are experiencing with taking that orange pill and seeding it down. So yeah, I wish you all the best of luck with everything you have going on, especially with the Looking Glass project and the books, and I'm sure you have a lot of other things under the bonnet cooking. So good luck with those. Once again, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. I guess, what is the best place to send our listeners? Would it be your X account or and Looking Glass as well, as you mentioned, right?
Yeah, so you can check out just Looking Glass, which is lookingglasseducation.com. We have obviously all of those kind of free resources, courses. We can help with custody. And then there's also, you can find me on Twitter, which is just Seb Bunney, SEBBUNNEY. And for people that want to kind of learn more about kind of some of the subjects that we've discussed, like check out The Hidden Cost of Money, which is the book that I released in December. And that's available on Amazon. And I always want to make sure that price should never be a barrier to people's learning. So if you're listening to this and you don't have the financial means to be able to purchase the book, just reach out on Twitter or my website, sebbunny.com, and I'm more than happy to send you a copy of the ebook for free.
Amazing. Well, there you have it, guys. We'll have everything in the show notes. Keep on learning, keep staying humble, stack sats, and be a better human 1% a day. Seb,
Thanks,
speak to you again soon, and thank you so much.